Amy Wood, and I'm joined today by Trey Gowdy. He's the former Seventh Circuit solicitor in the upstate. A lot of people remember Mr. Gowdy from all those years, and of course, a former congressman from South Carolina. The seat that William Timmons is now in is the seat that Trey Gowdy held for 8 years. So let's talk a little bit about this book that you have out. And I want to dig into the book in a moment, but we do have so much going on today in the state. You may have heard the President of the United States is in the Carolinas, and he's not far away from us as we speak. He's in Charlotte at the moment, I think, about to accept the nomination really quickly. A surprise visit to the convention. And then he's going to have a bunch of speakers on the RNC agenda tonight. So it's almost like a South Carolina kind of day at the RNC. We've got Nikki Haley speaking later, and one of your dear friends, Tim Scott, is on the agenda tonight. What do you think about South Carolina politicians being in the limelight like this?
Well, I think our state has always kind of punched a little bit over our weight for our size. You know, in addition to Tim and Nikki, we've got the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee. We've got the former chief of staff of the President of the United States. So South Carolina has always been on the national scene. We've acquitted ourselves well. Even before that, I mean, Senator Hollings and Senator Thurmond were there forever, and they worked really well together. You're right. Tim Scott is one of my closest friends on the planet. I'll watch it all, but I will be watching him with particular interest because I know how hard he's worked on this speech.
Do we know what's up his sleeve? Like what's he got planned for us tonight?
Oh, knowing Tim the way I do, he will not be ad hominem. He will not be partisan. He will be contrasting. Politics is about contrast. He will be contrasting. And if you know Tim, he is so hopeful and so aspirational. He will leave the listener feeling better. He's going to acknowledge the challenges we have, but he's going to leave the listener understanding that the world that we live in now is better than the one that he was born into in the early 1960s.
Let me ask you, you've got this fantastic book that just came out. I just finished reading it last night, and it deals with, if you want to learn how to ask effective questions and persuade people, that's kind of what the book is all about. And within it is weaved so much interesting stuff about, whether you're talking Republican Party stuff, whether you're talking all the famous hearings we heard you be part of and witness questioning that you did that put you in the national spotlight, and the big stories from our area, from your prosecuting days where there are huge crimes, the Dana Satterfield case, the case that involved the poor woman who raced to the police station trying to not be killed by her domestic abuser. I mean, some of these cases, many people in the upstate will remember from years ago. But let's start, before we actually get into all of those things, let's start a little bit about the RNC and the fact that you talked in the book about the Republican Party being ineffective in a sense, or that we've been a little bit ineffective, that you had gone to Congress, you got there, you had the Senate and the White House not Republican, and then in 2016 everybody said, well, if we get the Senate and the White House, we can get stuff done. And in the book you write, Trey Gowdy, that not much got done.
Yeah, we had a plan to win. I'm not sure we had a plan to govern. You're right. When I came in 2011, we needed the House. And then shortly thereafter, well, we can't do it with just the House. We need the Senate. I vividly remember being on stage with Tim Scott in North Carolina, kind of imploring folks in Western North Carolina to go vote in a race that wound up being won by Tom Tillis. Well, we got the Senate, but what we really, really, really need is the White House. And then in 2016, I mean, you got to be careful what you ask for, because sometimes people will give it to you. We had the House, the Senate, and the White House. And in my judgment, and look, I mean, people are welcome to their own opinion, and just because I believe it doesn't mean I'm right. I don't know that we had a governing agenda. I think in politics now, a lot of the argument is we're better than the others. We're better than the other side. Every now and again, they're going to believe you, and they're going to say, okay, here are all three gears of government: House, Senate, White House. Let's see what you do. We struggled on health care. We did pass some bills, but the American people have a sense of humor, and it wasn't long before they took the House away from the Republicans and gave it to the Democrats. So winning is great. One of the reasons I didn't like politics is winning for the sake of winning, or winning as the only objective you have, is not a great long-term strategy. You have to know why you want to win, and you have to have some core precepts and principles. And they were not there in sufficient numbers for me to enjoy my time in D.C.
How do you feel about right now with the Republicans? Do you think there is an agenda that can get them beyond just winning if they were to win this election?
Well, I think the two dominant issues right now are obviously COVID and kind of the unrest that's going on in our country right now. COVID to me is a perfect example, Amy, of kind of what's broken. The pandemic doesn't care what your political orthodoxy is. It doesn't care about anything. That should be unifying for us. That should be an opportunity for us to come together. But it's on the ballot. Certainly the contrast between the way the parties view criminal justice reform and what happened in Minneapolis versus what's happening in Portland, Oregon, and whether there's a causal link. I mean, I was one of the first people that I heard that called Minneapolis for what I thought it was, which was murder. So how does creating more innocent victims honor the memory of an innocent victim in Minneapolis? I don't see the causal link. I do think that's on the ballot in November. So if you like contrast, it's an election for contrast. But the big changes that both the parties are talking about requires more than a narrow victory. It requires more of a mandate, and I don't think that's going to happen in November.
You talk a little bit in the book, obviously, since we're talking about persuasion a lot in this book, you talk about some people are kind of debaters and some people are more persuasion oriented. And you mentioned like Ted Cruz, for example, or Elizabeth Warren as examples of people who have sort of scientific ways about constructing their arguments and making a good case for something. I'm curious to know, on the tickets that we have right now on the Democrat Republican side, President Trump, debater, persuader?
Ratifier.
Okay.
I would say a ratifier. I think politics right now is more about ratifying what people already believe. I can tell you in off-camera or non-public experiences with him, he does engage in the art of persuasion. But politics now is about ratifying or validating what you believe the largest group already believes. I didn't hear a lot at the DNC of trying to convince people that there is a better way policy-wise. And I don't know what I'm going to hear at the RNC. There are persuaders in politics that are left, but the model right now seems to believe that there's a silent majority. And we just have to awaken this silent majority and we will win. I don't hear a lot of talking to people who don't agree with you, trying to convince them that there's a better way. Maybe it happens. Maybe I'm hanging around the wrong people, but I don't see it a lot.
Tell me, Joe Biden, do you feel like he's more a debater or someone who persuades?
I think the old Joe Biden, by reputation, tried to persuade at least the folks that served with him in the Senate. But now that's coming back to haunt him. And the same with Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris was a prosecutor and an attorney general in California, but for reasons I don't fully understand, those have become liabilities now in politics. I mean, I never, ever thought I would see the day that being an enforcer of law was a political liability. So you can't be a courtroom lawyer without being a persuader. So at some point in her life, she had to engage in the art of persuasion. Now, I really think on both sides, it is trying to rally the base and hope that your base is bigger than the other side's base.
Would you put Mike Pence also into that ratifying kind of category, or do you feel like he's persuasive in any way?
Well, again, let me show my bias. I was on the Judiciary Committee with now Vice President Pence. He was actually my favorite questioner to listen to. I mean, I love the art of asking the right questions, and I admire it when there are really good people that do it. Mike Pence I would stop what I was doing and pay attention to Mike Pence. Part of it's his mannerism. Part of it's the fact that he never gets too high or too low. When I worked with him in Congress, he was a persuader. As the vice president now, I think you are a supporter. If you have disagreements with your boss, the president, you're probably encouraged to keep those private as opposed to public. He certainly has a different tone, a different style. If you think back to his debate with Senator Kaine, when Secretary Clinton was running against Donald Trump, very different styles, very different techniques. Mike Pence is not a flashy, bombastic guy. And when I worked with him, he was more in that, trying to persuade model.
One of the things you really dig into in some depth is the Benghazi hearings, and in particular, sort of a very open and candid reflection of what you see as your own failure in that event and sort of miscalculations. You talk a lot about understanding, what you're really taking on, and putting it in the right perspective in the book. What do you think? Detail sort of a little bit, give people a glimpse into your own self-reflection on the Benghazi hearings and Secretary Clinton, et cetera.
Well, Amy, thank the Lord you mentioned my time as district attorney. That was my favorite job. That will always be my favorite job. I am used to running law enforcement type investigations. I am used to having 12 people sitting in a jury box who have not made up their minds yet. I mean, by definition, if you're on a jury, you have to be open-minded. And I was naive and wrong to think that even in something that was really tantamount to a murder case, I mean, we had 4 dead Americans. I still to this day can't tell you the politics of any of the 4. I really can't tell you the politics of the survivors. So when I'm focused on the victims, it's not about their political orthodoxy. It's about what happened to them, why it happened to them, how could it have been prevented. So I'm thinking if you run this like you used to run your old investigations, behind closed doors, no leaks, keep an open mind, follow the facts wherever they go, that the jury will appreciate that. What I did not figure out in time is, no offense, I'm not including you, but the DC media, if it wasn't about her, they weren't interested. So that was their interest.
And about the email, right? There was an email focus.
Oh, our committee received very little attention until the New York Times. It was not the crazy guy from South Carolina. It was the New York Times that broke her email story. And that kind of overwhelmed the fact that we had 4 dead Americans. It was her email. And quite frankly, Amy, she handled that issue terribly. I mean, she would have been fine saying, I had a secret email arrangement because I didn't want you crazy Republicans reading my emails. She would have been fine. But that's not what she said. She said things that just don't pass the credibility test. And then if you remember back then, Jim Comey, in one of the hearings, I went through what she said and asked him if it was true. And it was a long series of no's. So what's imprinted in the public's mind is a lack of credibility. I think still now, if you were to do one of those word clouds and you put Hillary Clinton in the center of that and you kind of figured out what words you associate with her, I think a lack of candor would be in the word cloud.
You also dig into the sort of reason you left Congress, right? And you talk about, I left the courtroom because the questions were better than the answers. You also write, I left Congress because the questions never matter in politics. And you also write that almost everyone in DC already has his or her mind made up. For you, who liked to persuade, that had to be a pretty frustrating experience. But my question is, what does that mean about the value of serving in Congress? I mean, can things really get done there? Are you the wrong guy to do that kind of thing? Or is it really almost impossible to do it?
It's impossible right now unless you have the House, the Senate, and the White House. there is no incentive to find common ground. The great irony is most members of Congress get along very well with each other in our personal lives, off camera. You go to the floor of the House and you really can't tell the R's from the D's. I used to sit on the D side. I very good friend in Tulsi Gabbard and Kirsten Sinema, and I really, really like Joey Kennedy, and I mentioned that in the book.
Mm-hmm.
I found them interesting to talk to. Now, we would put our voting cards in and we would vote differently, but they were interesting to talk to. So the personal relationships are there, but in politics, 99 is a failing grade. I mean, the only way William Timmons can lose in this district is lose to a Republican. He's not, I mean, Bob Inglis lost to a Republican. I could have lost to a Republican. William Timmons will not lose to a Democrat. So the redistricting, I think, is what has made politics, to a large extent, what it is right now.
You talk a little bit also about that seat and the 8 years and what there is to show for it, which you write, there really is not much to show for that except a renewed sense of enlightenment on how to live on what remains of this life and enlighten us. Like, so what does that mean? How will you live as a result of all that you've experienced?
Well, the last thing I say to everybody, every one of my former colleagues that calls me, no matter whether they're a Republican or Democrat, I say, I thank you for your continued public service because I know it's hard. So I am grateful to people that are willing to run. I don't understand it, but I'm grateful. 2/3 of my life is in the rearview mirror. Amy, you know my family. You know how sweet and wonderful and kind my wife is. So you just have to prioritize. And the job I want to be remembered for is the one you alluded to. I want to be remembered as the person that walked into the courtroom with the Spartanburg County Sheriff's Department and got justice for Dana Satterfield, or for Nell Lindsay, or fill in the blank over 10 years. And then I was a federal prosecutor before that. That's a job I love. And I like the courtroom. It makes sense to me. Politics, I'm an observer of it. I still follow it. I think the issues are, interesting, but it's hard to see a lot of persuasion in our modern political environment.
One of the things that's interesting to me that kind of perplexes me a little bit. Okay, you write in the book a little bit about how the challenge is to persuade, and sometimes if people are stuck in their point of view and they're completely on one side or the other, it's hard to reach them. But you're a Fox News analyst, so you're kind of preaching to the choir. And it's not, you write in the book how that's not as challenging sometimes when you're talking to people who already agree with you. The challenge is to talk to the people who don't. What is that like for you? I mean, do you wind up sort of feeling like you are preaching to the choir, or is there enough debate going on within the Republican Party that there's plenty to talk about?
Well, it's a little bit of both. I mean, obviously, if you go on CNN or MSNBC, the questions would be different, although, and you can appreciate this because you are in the media, there are opinion shows and then there are more news shows, and those interviews are different. I kind of view my role as saying, okay, if this is what we believe, do we know why we believe it? And have we fully considered all of the arguments on the other side? So kind of the role I try to cut out for myself, and I'm not saying I'm successful, but what my objective is to say, okay, you're probably conservative and probably a Republican, or you wouldn't be watching this station. Have you thought about this? Have you considered that? Have you looked at this issue in a different way? It's almost empowering people to be more persuasive themselves as they go out and have conversations. I mean, anybody can read talking points off. They are bad. This is good. Anybody can do that. But to have a more nuanced or slightly different way of looking at an issue, and I do find myself sometimes in the minority. I mean, most people would not advise President Trump not to talk about his accomplishments at the RNC, but I did last week. I said, you're asking me for advice? I'll tell you what I would advise the president. Let others talk about your success. Let others contrast you with Biden. You are uniquely situated in the history of this country, in the throes of a pandemic and civil unrest. give an aspirational, hopeful speech for America. You're the president of the United States. That would be my advice to him. I'd be in a small group of people that gave him that advice.
Your book is going to get up on the screen here so we can make sure that everybody knows the name of it. It's called Doesn't Hurt to Ask. And the highlighted letters, which you may not be able to see, the yellow there, is using the power of questions to communicate, connect, and persuade. What do you hope people get from the book?
How to be heard. It is not a book, Amy, you read it. Thank you for that. It is not a book about what I believe. It is a book to empower you on how to effectively communicate what you believe. And so the first part of it, I kind of set what you absolutely have to have if you want to be effectively heard and communicate. And then the second part of the book is how to use questions. And I'll tell the story in the book, Amy, of the president inviting me into a conversation that he was having with members of the media. And I did not wake up in South Carolina that morning thinking I would be in the middle of a conversation between the president and members of the media. But he said, Trey, what do you think? So you got a choice. You can say, I think, I feel, I believe. That's what a lot of people would do. My first words out of my mouth were a question. Do you believe in the power of questions? And have you kind of interviewed yourself enough to know what the strengths of your position are, what the weaknesses are? I believe that questions can be persuasive and they can move the person with whom you are communicating. And I just want to teach people how to pick the right question at the right time.
It is a tough time to do it, right? Because the world is so divided. But if there was ever a time to try to persuade people and to kind of find some middle ground, I guess this is it.
Well, you know, Amy, I'm a lot older than you are, but we're living in a 50-50 country. I don't want to die in a 50-50 country. I want the person with the best facts and the most persuasive argument to prevail. And then maybe we can get to 55-45 or even 60-40. That would be phenomenal in a society like ours. But at least that's not the conflict that we have now.
Trey Gowdy joining us today. Thank you so much and good luck with the book. Again, putting it back on the screen here as we wrap up. Thank you, sir. Doesn't Hurt to Ask by Trey Gowdy. Look for it on your favorite book site. Thanks.
Thank you.